In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl describes specific situations that occurred during his imprisonment to illustrate a point. Near the end of his book, as he discusses the connections between loss of faith in the future and giving up on life entirely, he tells the following story. My senior block warden, a fairly well-known composer and librettist, confided in me one day, "I would like to tell you something, doctor. I've had a strange dream. A voice told me that I could wish for something, that I should only say what I wanted to know, and all my questions would be answered. What do you think I asked? That I would like to know when the war would be over for me. You know what I mean, doctor? For me, I wanted to know when our camp would be liberated and our sufferings come to an end." "And when did you have this dream?" I asked. "In February 1945, he answered. "It was the beginning of March." "What did your dream voice answer?" Furtively, he whispered to me, "March 30th. When he told me about his dream, he was still full of hope and convinced that the voice of his dream would be right. But as the promised day grew nearer, the war news which reached our camp made it appear very unlikely that we would be free on the promised date. On March 29th, my friend suddenly became ill and ran a high temperature. On March 30th, the day his prophecy had told him that the war and suffering would be over for him, he became delirious and lost consciousness. On March 31st, he was dead. To all outward appearances, he had died of typhus. This week's Parsha is Chayei Sarah, or the life of Sarah. After reading two portions about her as sort of a backdrop to the life of Abraham, we finally get to learn her story. The problem is that the portion begins with her death. Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. What an odd way to begin to tell the story of someone's life by announcing her death. The question is, how or why did Sarah die? There's no mention of her being ill. Although Torah never provides an explanation, nor does it make a connection, exegetical tradition says that she died immediately after hearing about Isaac's narrow escape on the mountain. The story is that she died of shock when she learned that Abraham was about to kill their son without telling her a word of it, or maybe because of the alarming news of his near death. One contemporary Torah scholar sees her death, even though she knew that God had saved Isaac, as her inability to live in a world as dangerous and unreliable as she found it to be. It seems to be what caused the death of Frankl's friend, a mere month before the entire prisoner population of Turkheim was liberated on April 27th, 1945. Many of the prisoners that Frankl met and worked with died because their world outside the camp, their future, no longer held any kind of promise. The body's immunity to whatever disease ravaged the camp was fatally compromised when their faith in the future and will to live ceased. The chief doctor at Turkheim told Frankl, who at the time worked in the sickbay with him, that the death rates of the concentration camp the week before Christmas 1944 and New Year's 1945 increased dramatically. Frankl posits that this was in large part due to the fact that, quote, the majority of the prisoners lived in the naive hope that they would be home again by Christmas, end quote. Frankl came to the conclusion, as a result of his imprisonment and studied observations of his fellow inmates, one's attitude towards life is fundamental to both your physical and mental health. He stated that it didn't really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us and one's ability to believe in that hope. The real story of the life of Sarah is told in the ensuing pages of this portion, just as our lives are told in the lives of the people who come after us. In mid-September, we attended the funeral of Steve's Aunt Marilyn, who was his dad's youngest sister and the last living sibling of the family. On a table set up in the narthex of the church were all the relics of Aunt Marilyn's life. There was her well-worn Betty Crocker cookbook, kitchen utensils, favorite books, All Things Bright and Beautiful by James Herriot, many pictures, a pair of shoes and the dress from one of the pictures, and not just a lock of hair, but her pigtailed braids. During the service, her 3 children got up to tell heartfelt stories that they remembered of times with their mom and dad. We laughed, we cried, we all remembered our own memories of this incredibly kind and faithful servant of God. The thing is, these were stories of her life in the past. The real story of Marilyn is written in the lives of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Marilyn lived a life that made a difference to the future. We are all living our stories now, but what actually matters is what happens after we are gone, the impact we make on the future. That was the point of Frankel's story. If you cannot see the future, your own or the one that will continue in the hearts and minds of those who come after you, you lose hope. Understanding that it's not about what we expect from life now or after we are gone is our purpose. Meaning and purpose come when you finally come to grips with the fact that life has expectations of you. In another story, Frankel told that one evening after a minor theft of a potato by a semi-starved prisoner, the camp authorities announced that either the guilty man be identified and turned over for punishment, or the entire camp would starve for a day. The 2,500 men chose the fast. However, that evening, the mood in the barracks was low. The senior block warden began to give a pep talk with the hope of encouraging the men, but turned to Frankel to give his advice. Frankel began by talking about the trivial comforts they had and the hope that the future offered them. He shared Friedrich Nietzsche's observation, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." That was Frankel's advice. Despite the deprivation they experienced, their bones were still intact. They could still converse and work. Courage and dignity were what they needed to hang on to in order to survive. At the end of his talk, many of the miserable figures who had lain silent in their beds listening to him came forward with tears in their eyes to thank him for his words of encouragement. Doubtless, it was the courage of Sarah that brought Abraham to bewail and mourn his wife. After he purchased land and a tomb to lay her in, he proceeded to find a wife for Isaac. When Rebekah was brought to Isaac as a result of that search, we are told he took her into Sarah's tent and he loved her. God's promise of descendants began in that tent. Sarah's life continued in her children, grandchildren, and descendants that live even today. Postscript. After Frankel was released, he found himself on a walk down a country road, past fields of flowers, birds chirping in the sky above him. And there was one thought that came to his mind and that he repeated to himself over and over. It was a paraphrase of Psalm 118:5. "I called to the Lord from my narrow prison, and he answered me in the freedom of space." May God free you from whatever prison you are currently living in, whether mental, financial, or physical, and answer you in the freedom of space. May that freedom give you courage and hope in the future, however dark it may seem today. Remember, Nietzsche also said, "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how." And that, my friend, is the true meaning of life.